It's an incredibly provocative and controversial issue. It's outlawed for cosmetics in the EU, but still happens elsewhere. They still have to use it for products, I believe, which have anti-aging ingredients and when testing drugs. But a Huddersfield University doctor is now one step closer to devising an alternative to animal testing. She could be close to finding an end to this.
BBC for West Yorkshire.
BBC Radio Leeds.
Dr. Laura Waters believes that breakthroughs in chemistry and computers could make it unnecessary to use live animals for tests. Now she's been given a high-profile public platform to state her views. She'll be speaking at the prestigious British Science Festival, which takes place in Bradford in September. Pleased to say, though, that ahead of that, she joins us now. Dr. Waters, how are you?
Good afternoon, Johnny.
First of all, is it Laura, or do you like the more formal approach?
I prefer Laura.
Laura, okay. I mean, people might not necessarily realise that animal testing still goes on and quite regularly, particularly when it comes to medicine, doesn't it?
Animal testing is compulsory for any new drugs that you develop. So if you work in the pharmaceutical industry and you come up with a new drug, it's EU legislation that you must go through animal testing. And I don't think it need be this way. I think there's some great alternatives out there, and I think there's some alternatives under development which could replace it. Part of the problem is getting people to see that the alternatives exist, and they're just as good, if not superior, to using animals.
So what are the alternatives then? What are the ones that you think could be the future?
Well, there's quite a few different ways of looking at it. The research that I do in my group, we use chemicals in a few different ways. So we recreate a cell membrane using chemicals. We don't do any animal testing at Huddersfield, and so we put drugs into our mimics and we see how they behave, and then we can compare that with one drug with another, and then we can determine how they'd react in the body. We also do some work with computer simulations, so you can predict how a drug's going to behave by simulating it. And we also, a recent project we're just getting into is looking at prostate mimic, because animal testing on prostates is pointless in my opinion. They're very different to a human prostate, so if you're looking at drug for something like prostate cancer, there's no point testing in animals because it just won't behave in the same way.
In terms of testing on animals, as abhorrent as many people find it, myself including yourself obviously included in that, isn't the problem in using those aforementioned methods which you've developed, such as obviously cells and computer systems, is that as close as they may be to real life, they will never actually properly imitate an actual living animal?
You're right, but then an animal doesn't imitate what will happen when you give it to a human. So do you remember 5 years ago there was the clinical trials which went really wrong?
Yeah.
Where some volunteers were given, 6 individuals were given a new drug which was actually safe in animals, and the dose was 500 times lower than that given to the animals, and yet still there were catastrophic side effects which hadn't been seen in the animals.
What about when, obviously that's from the physiological side of things, but when it comes to behavioural too, can computers really imitate what behaviour may happen? As you say, obviously animals are different to humans psychologically and physically, but behaviourally they still have personalities, they still would change according to what drugs they're given, and a computer surely can't really ever guess that.
You're right, but I'd say that's the reason why we shouldn't be using animals. All of the alternatives that are out there, if you put them all together, and depending on what you're trying to mimic, use different alternatives, then that's quite a good way of seeing how a new drug could behave. And also there's lots of drugs already that have been tested, so you can compare an existing drug with your new drug, because they tend to be quite similar in some circumstances. So by looking at what's already on the market and seeing how that's reacted, you can make good predictions.
How has the science community reacted to this, Laura? Because I imagine obviously some will be with you and the others will say, you're bonkers, we can't use computers, we have to actually use a living thing, a living organism.
I'd like to think that everyone stops and thinks about it, and even if at the end of the day they haven't changed their mind, at least they've considered the alternatives. I'd like to think that it could come about that in the pharmaceutical industry it's not a requirement to do the testing, there is an alternative option available, and if it's felt for a particular clinical trial that the alternative is acceptable, then the industry could go with that. But at the moment, even if they want to consider an alternative, they can't, because by law they have to do the tests.
Just finally, you're speaking at the British Science Festival, which takes place in Bradford in September. That must be quite a lot of kudos for you.
It is, and I'm really looking forward to giving my lecture. My lecture's on the 14th of September, but events go on all week long. I'll be talking about animal testing and going through the alternatives, and there'll be a lot of audience participation, giving people the opportunity to interact as well and let me know their thoughts. We're also having an event on the 23rd of September at the University of Huddersfield called Researchers Night, where we're encouraging the public to come and speak to us about our research as well.
Great stuff. Laura, good luck with it, and we'll
you.
catch up again around the Science Festival. Take care.
Thanks, bye.
Dr. Laura Waters there of the University of Huddersfield.
BBC for West Yorkshire.
BBC Radio Leeds.